They banned these films, burned the reels, arrested the directors. Every single one of them survived, and they're streaming right now. The 1970s exploitation era produced some of the most raw, dangerous, and misunderstood cinema in Hollywood history. Studios called them trash. Film scholars now call them masterpieces. So, which side is actually right? Let's find out. Sweetback's Baadasssss song, 1971. Before Spike Lee, before John Singleton. Before any black filmmaker cracked Hollywood's iron ceiling wide open, Melvin Van Peebles did the unthinkable. He self-financed this film for $150,000, shot it guerrilla style on stolen locations across Los Angeles, and distributed it himself after every major studio slammed the door in his face. Sweetback's Baadasssss song didn't just break rules, it rewrote the entire rulebook of American independent cinema in one furious electric swing. The film follows a street performer who goes on the run after witnessing police brutality against a young black man. Simple premise, explosive execution. Van Peebles wore every hat imaginable: director, writer, composer, and lead actor, all at once. The MPAA gave it an X rating, which Van Peebles immediately turned into a marketing weapon. He slapped the tagline, "Rated X" by an all-white jury, onto every poster. Movie theaters in Atlanta refused to screen it. Certain cities tried to ban it outright. It earned over $15 million at the box office, from $150,000. That math alone should stop you cold. The Black Panther Party officially declared it required viewing for all members. Huey Newton wrote a lengthy essay about its revolutionary power. Film critic Roger Ebert, never one to shower exploitation films with praise, called it a brilliant, audacious piece of American filmmaking. Van Peebles once said he made the film to give black audiences a victorious, sexually aware, politically conscious hero. That hero arrived, and Hollywood never fully recovered from the impact. This film is the godfather of blaxploitation, of black independent cinema, and arguably of modern black Hollywood itself, and understand where everything started. Coffy, 1973. Pam Grier walked into a room, and the entire genre of action cinema shifted on its axis. Coffy arrived in 1973 like a thunderstorm, placing a black woman at the center of a revenge thriller at a time when Hollywood barely acknowledged black women existed on screen at all. The result was ferocious, stylish, and shockingly smart beneath its exploitation surface. Grier plays a nurse who wages a one-woman war against the drug dealers who destroyed her younger sister's life. She uses her wit, her rage, and her absolute refusal to be underestimated as weapons far more lethal than anything she carries in her hands. Director Jack Hill constructed the film around Grier's magnetic screen presence, and she delivered a performance so commanding that even serious critics were forced to pay attention. American International Pictures produced it on a budget so small it barely registered, yet Coffy became one of the highest-grossing films of 1973. That number stunned the industry. Nobody had predicted a black female action lead could pull those kinds of numbers. The film essentially invented a template that Hollywood would take decades to properly revisit. Grier received almost no major award recognition at the time. Years later, Quentin Tarantino, who cited Pam Grier as a foundational inspiration, cast her and Jackie Brown as a direct tribute to everything Coffy represented. He called her the first female action star in cinema history. That statement aged extraordinarily well. The film was controversial for its unflinching portrayal of urban drug culture, and certain broadcast networks refused to air it unedited. What they couldn't censor was its cultural legacy. Coffy is raw, righteous, and completely essential viewing. Switchblade Sisters, 1975. Jack Hill directed this one too, and if Coffy showed the world what a single woman could do, Switchblade Sisters showed what happens when an entire gang of women decides the world belongs to them. Paramount Pictures acquired the film and then panicked. They shelved it almost immediately after release, convinced audiences weren't ready for this level of female aggression on screen. They were spectacularly wrong. The film follows a girl gang called the Dagger Debs, navigating turf wars, betrayal, and a power struggle that turns the entire social order of their world upside down. Hill loaded the script with sharp political subtext, weaving in references to fascism and class warfare beneath what looks on the surface like a drive-in brawl movie. That layering is what makes it extraordinary. For 2 decades, the film essentially disappeared. Then Quentin Tarantino, through his Rolling Thunder Pictures distribution label, re-released it in 1996 with a passionate personal endorsement. Suddenly, critics who had never seen it were calling it a misunderstood feminist landmark. Film scholar B. Ruby Rich later included it in academic discussions about gender representation in 1970s American cinema. The budget was reportedly under $300,000. The film has since been featured in multiple greatest cult films ever made lists, across publications including Rolling Stone and Entertainment Weekly. One of the lead actresses, Joanne Nail, gave a performance so ferociously committed that Hill later said she scared even the male crew members during certain scenes. That kind of energy doesn't come from a script. It comes from a director who understood exactly what he was building. Stream this one and watch cinema history hiding inside a gang movie. The Harder They Come, 1972. This Jamaican production didn't just give the world a great film, it gave the world reggae music as a global phenomenon. Director Perry Hensel made The Harder. They come on a shoestring budget with no professional actors, no studio backing, and no guarantee that anyone outside Jamaica would ever see it. What he created instead was a furious, beautiful, completely original piece of cinema that blindsided audiences in every country it reached. Jimmy Cliff stars as Ivanhoe Martin, a young man who arrives in Kingston with dreams of becoming a reggae star, and instead gets swallowed whole by a corrupt music industry and an even more corrupt police force. His descent into outlaw legend is filmed with documentary-level rawness that no Hollywood production could have faked. The streets, the sounds, the desperation, all of it is real. The film was initially banned in Jamaica itself. The government considered its portrayal of police corruption and drug culture to be dangerously inflammatory. That ban lasted years. Meanwhile, the film's soundtrack was selling out record stores across Europe and North America, introducing Bob Marley's entire generation of musicians to international audiences for the first time. American distributors had absolutely no idea how to market it. It opened on a tiny platform release in Boston and New York in 1973 and built its audience entirely through word of mouth. By 1975, it had become a genuine cult phenomenon screening at midnight shows across the United States. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars. Pauline Kael called it electrifying. Jimmy Cliff's performance remains one of the most authentic and devastating in 1970s world cinema. This is the film that nobody in Hollywood made, but everyone in the world needed to see. Truck Turner, 1974. Isaac Hayes. The man won an Academy Award for composing the Shaft theme. He had a Grammy. He had a global music career at its absolute peak. And then in 1974, he decided to act in a gritty, violent, deeply entertaining exploitation film about a bounty hunter. And somehow, it worked even better than anyone had the right to expect. Truck Turner follows Mack, Truck Turner, a skip tracer who takes on a dangerous assignment that puts him in the crosshairs of one of the most formidable criminal networks ever assembled for a low-budget action film. Hayes plays the role with a quiet, heavyweight authority that carries every scene without effort. Director Jonathan Kaplan wisely understood that the best thing he could do was simply point the camera at Hayes and let the man operate. The film contains what many exploitation scholars consider the single greatest villain speech in the entire genre. Nichelle Nichols, famous worldwide as Lieutenant Uhura from Star Trek, plays Dorinda, a fierce and terrifying crime boss whose monologue over the body of a fallen associate is so venomous and so perfectly delivered that audiences reportedly burst into spontaneous applause in theaters. A Star Trek icon delivering that kind of raw menace was something nobody was prepared for. American International Pictures released it, and it performed solidly at the box office, though it never quite got the serious critical attention it deserved at the time. Decades later, it appeared on numerous most underrated films of the 1970s lists. Hayes also composed the entire score, which means the film functions simultaneously as an action movie and an Isaac Hayes concert experience. That combination is as extraordinary as it sounds. Sisters, 1972. Brian De Palma made this film in the same year he was being dismissed by mainstream critics as merely a Hitchcock imitator. Sisters proved those critics weren't paying close enough attention. This is a film so psychologically disturbing, so technically inventive, and so willing to go places that no major studio would have sanctioned, that it stands today as one of the most important American horror films of its entire decade. A journalist witnesses what she believes is a brutal crime through a window in a Staten Island apartment complex. What follows is a descent into secrets involving conjoined twins, a manipulative doctor, and a mystery that systematically destroys every assumption the audience brings into the theater. De Palma deploys a split-screen sequence in the film's first act that is so audaciously constructed that film students still study it frame by frame in cinematography classes today. The studio that financed it, American International Pictures, wanted significant changes after seeing the first cut. De Palma refused nearly all of them. The disagreement was reportedly fierce. The version that exists today is largely De Palma's original vision, which is remarkable given how little leverage a young director had in 1972. Margot Kidder, years before Superman made her a household name, delivers a dual performance of startling complexity. She plays both sisters simultaneously in certain scenes, and the physical and emotional differentiation she achieves is extraordinary work for any actress, let alone one at that early stage of her career. Bernard Herrmann, the legendary composer who scored Psycho for Hitchcock, provided the music. That connection is not subtle. It is deliberate, brilliant, and deeply unsettling. Sisters is on every streaming platform you check, and it deserves to be watched with all the lights off. Foxy Brown, 1974. If Coffy made Pam Grier a star, Foxy Brown made her an icon. Director Jack Hill originally intended this as a direct sequel to Coffy, but American International Pictures decided to rebrand it as a standalone film with a new character. That decision created one of the most electrifying action protagonists in the history of American cinema, and it did so, almost by accident. Foxy Brown is a woman who infiltrates a crime syndicate responsible for the killing of her federal agent boyfriend. She does this not by trusting law enforcement, not by appealing to authority, but by becoming more dangerous and more resourceful than everyone who underestimates her. The film is explicit about its politics. The villains are white, wealthy, and connected. The hero is a black woman who receives zero help from any institution and creates justice entirely on her own terms. This made certain distribution partners extremely uncomfortable. Several markets refused to book it without edits. AIP refused to allow those edits. The film screened intact in most major American cities and grossed over $2.5 million in its opening weekend, which for a sub-$1 million budget film in 1974 was a genuinely spectacular result. Grier has spoken in interviews about the physical demands of the role, noting that she performed the majority of her own action sequences without a stunt double. One chase sequence filmed through a housing project in Los Angeles reportedly required 17 takes in blazing summer heat. Grier completed all 17 without complaint. Quentin Tarantino, in a 1997 interview with Sight and Sound magazine, called A Foxy Brown the greatest action film ever made by anyone. That might be hyperbole, but it is not uninformed hyperbole. This film earns every frame of its reputation. Deadly Weapons, 1974. Doris Wishman directed this film at a time when female directors in exploitation cinema were so rare as to be essentially invisible, and she did it with a level of subversive intelligence that the industry was far too busy dismissing to notice. Wishman made over 30 films during her career, spanning multiple decades. This one is perhaps her most audaciously bizarre, and that is saying something extraordinary given the competition from her own filmography. The premise centers on a woman who tracks down the gangsters responsible for her boyfriend's murder. The revenge she extracts is theatrical, outrageous, and deliberately absurd in ways that feel more like performance art than straightforward exploitation. Wishman herself called the film a parody of the male gaze in a 1981 interview, a statement that film scholars have been unpacking ever since because it suggests a level of intentionality that the film's reputation rarely credited. The production was filmed in New York on a budget that barely covered basic equipment rental. Wishman used locations without permits, hired actors who worked for almost nothing, and edited the film herself in her apartment. The resulting technical roughness became part of the film's strange, dreamlike texture. The film was effectively banned from mainstream distribution channels and circulated almost entirely through adult theater circuits that were willing to take chances on unconventional content. For decades, it existed only on degraded prints passed between collectors. The fact that a restored version is now streamable represents a remarkable archival triumph. Film historian Eric Schaeffer, who wrote the definitive academic book on American exploitation cinema, cited Wishman as one of the most genuinely original creative voices of the entire exploitation era. She deserves to be treated exactly that way. Deadly Weapons is strange, bold, and completely unlike anything else you will watch this year. The Mack, 1973. Every rapper who ever referenced the concept of street power, every screenwriter who ever tried to write a morally complex portrait of underground economy culture, and every filmmaker who ever attempted to capture the specific texture of 1970s Oakland street life owes an enormous creative debt to the Mack. This film was not simply a product of its moment. It created the visual and narrative language that an entire generation of artists would spend the next 50 years drawing from. Director Michael Campus shot the film on actual Oakland streets with the cooperation and participation of real figures from the community, some of whom appear in the film in non-speaking roles. That documentary foundation gives the film an authenticity that no studio production could have manufactured. The city itself becomes a character, breathing and dangerous and full of contradictions. Max Julien plays Goldie, a man who returns from prison and quickly rises to the top of Oakland's underground economy. The performance is cool, intelligent, and deeply layered. Julien makes Goldie simultaneously sympathetic and morally compromised, which was a sophistication that mainstream audiences in 1973 were not accustomed to seeing in films of this type. Richard Pryor appears in a supporting role and delivers some of the most naturally funny moments in the film with an effortless ease that is thrilling to watch. He and Julien reportedly improvised large sections of their scenes together, and those moments of genuine spontaneous chemistry are visible in every frame. The film was made for approximately $150,000 and grossed over $3 million theatrically. Ice Cube, Snoop Dogg, and numerous other artists have cited it publicly as a foundational influence. The Mack is not a museum piece. It is living cinema. The Velvet Vampire, 1971. Stephanie Rothman directed this film at Roger Corman's New World Pictures, and in doing so, she created something that should be studied in every film school on the planet, but rarely appears on any syllabus. Rothman was one of the only female directors working within the Corman exploitation machine at the time, and she used that position to make films that were simultaneously commercially viable and quietly, persistently radical in their feminist underpinnings. The Velvet Vampire is a vampire film set in the Mojave Desert. A young couple is invited to the remote estate of a beautiful, mysterious woman named Diane LeFanu, a name that is itself a direct literary reference to Sheridan Le Fanu's foundational vampire novella, Carmilla, written a century earlier. The film is soaked in heat, dreamlike imagery, and a psychological tension that owes as much to European art cinema as it does to American drive-in fare. What makes the film genuinely remarkable is how Rothman centers female desire and female agency within a genre that typically exists to destroy both. Diane is not a monster. She is the most powerful and self-possessed figure in every scene she inhabits. The male characters exist largely in relation to her choices, her appetite, and her vision of the world. In 1971, that was a genuinely radical inversion. New World Pictures initially promoted it as straightforward horror and received puzzled responses from drive-in audiences expecting conventional scares. The film found its true audience years later when feminist film critics discovered it and recognized what Rothman had actually built. Director John Sayles, who later became one of American independent cinema's most respected voices, worked under Rothman at New World and credited her with teaching him everything he initially understood about constructing a film with genuine thematic intelligence on a minimal budget. That is a legacy worth honoring. Stream The Velvet Vampire and discover the film that feminist cinema forgot to remember. Every single one of these films was censored, shelved, banned, or buried by people who were afraid of what they represented. And now, they're all streaming, waiting for you. Which of these do you think deserved the most attention? Drop your answer in the comments. And here's the real debate worth having. If these so-called exploitation films were actually more honest about race, gender, and power than anything the major studios were producing, does that mean Hollywood's prestige cinema of the 1970s was actually the real exploitation all along?